The parking lot was nearly empty that late Friday evening, the kind of silence that swallowed up the hum of the city beyond. Fluorescent lights buzzed faintly above, casting long shadows across the rows of sleek, expensive vehicles lined up in their designated spots. A lone figure moved slowly among them, his janitor's cart rattling with every step. His name was Mark, a single dad in his mid-40s whose hands carried the wear of long shifts and life's relentless blows. Mark worked quietly, sweeping up discarded coffee cups and empty food wrappers left by employees too busy to care. It was routine, predictable, until that one sound shattered it all. A car door clicked open somewhere across the lot. Mark turned, instinct sharpened not just by experience but by something deeper, a father's intuition. He froze as his eyes locked onto the CEO of the company, Evelyn Hart, standing by her Tesla. A stranger, a man in dark clothes with a low-slung cap, was speaking to her from the driver's side of an old sedan parked too close. His voice was calm, almost friendly, but his stance was wrong, too eager, too insistent. Evelyn, tired from a 14-hour day, didn't notice the subtle wrongness. She smiled politely, already half leaning toward the open passenger door the man gestured at, distracted by her phone buzzing in her hand. That's when Mark's voice split the night. "Don't get in the car." The shout cracked like a whip across the silence. Evelyn froze, stunned, turning her head toward the janitor she had barely acknowledged in 3 years of working late nights in the same building. His face was etched with urgency, his eyes burning with something beyond fear, certainty. "Step back," Mark barked again, his broom clattering to the ground as he rushed forward. The stranger's friendly mask dropped instantly. He slammed his car door shut and bolted into the darkness, tires screeching as the old sedan fishtail edged out of the lot. Evelyn's breath hitched, her knees buckling slightly as she tried to process what just happened. Her chest heaved as adrenaline flooded through her. She looked at Mark, confused, shaken. How did you know?" she whispered. Mark slowed his steps as he reached her, his chest rising and falling heavily. "I've seen men like him before," he said quietly. "Too many times. My daughter almost," he trailed off, swallowing hard, his eyes glistening in the pale light. "I wasn't going to let it happen again. Not to anyone." Evelyn stared at him, realization dawning like a cruel sunrise. She glanced back at the empty space where the stranger's car had been, her pulse still racing. In that moment, her identity as the CEO, the power, the authority, meant nothing. She was just a woman who had almost stepped into danger, saved by the one man she'd overlooked countless times. The security guards arrived late, their radios buzzing with half-hearted urgency, but the threat was already gone. They jotted notes, shrugged, and promised to review the cameras. Evelyn barely heard them. She was still watching Mark, noticing details she had never cared enough to see before, the deep lines around his eyes, the frayed edges of his uniform, the way his shoes were worn thin at the soles. "Why didn't you just ignore it?" she asked softly once the guards had dispersed. "Because I couldn't," he replied simply. "A father doesn't forget." The answer hung heavy in the cool night air. Over the weekend, Evelyn couldn't shake the memory. She tried burying herself in reports, meetings, and emails, but the sound of Mark's desperate voice echoed in her mind. She found herself replaying the scene. The way his shout had cut through the fog of danger she hadn't even recognized. The raw truth in his eyes. By Monday, she made a decision she had never made before. Instead of heading straight to her corner office, she took the elevator to the basement level where the janitorial staff clocked in. The smell of disinfectant and old mop water filled the hallway. A cluster of men and women in faded uniforms laughed quietly over styrofoam cups of coffee. They fell silent when she entered, their eyes widening. Mark looked up from where he was filling a mop bucket. Surprise flickered across his face before he straightened, awkward and stiff. "Ms. Hart." "I want to talk," Evelyn said, her voice softer than usual, lacking the sharp edge her employees knew so well. They stepped aside into a small supply room. The shelves were stacked with paper towels and cleaning solution, the hum of an old refrigerator in the corner filling the silence. Evelyn folded her arms, trying to steady herself. "You saved me," she began, "and I don't even know who you really are." Mark hesitated, shifting his weight. "There's not much to tell," he said. "I mop floors. I take out trash. I go home to my daughter, Lily. That's my life." But Evelyn wasn't convinced. She could see in his eyes that he was holding something back. You said, you've seen it before, she pressed gently. Your daughter. His jaw tightened, a flicker of pain flashing across his face. He looked away, staring at the concrete floor. Lily was 12, he murmured finally. There was a man in our neighborhood. Pretended to be friendly. Almost lured her into his van one day when she was walking home. I caught her just in time. If I'd been a minute later, his voice broke. He cleared his throat, forcing steadiness back into it. I can't forget the look in her eyes. Fear. Confusion. I swore I'd never let something like that happen if I could stop it. To her. To anyone. Evelyn's chest tightened as she listened. This wasn't the story of a janitor. This was the story of a father who had built his world around protecting the one person who mattered most. A man whose vigilance, born of pain, had saved her life. In the weeks that followed, Evelyn found herself seeing Mark everywhere. She noticed how he picked up every scrap of trash without complaint, how he worked double shifts without ever asking for overtime, how he always checked his phone at breaks, probably for messages from his daughter. One evening, she caught him sitting alone in the cafeteria after hours, a half-eaten sandwich in front of him. He was scrolling through photos on his phone, his face softening at the sight of a teenage girl with curly brown hair and a shy smile. That's Lily? Evelyn asked as she approached. Mark jumped slightly, then nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. Yeah, she's my whole world. Evelyn sat down across from him, surprising even herself. CEOs didn't sit with janitors, but tonight, she wasn't a CEO. She was just Evelyn, a woman still haunted by what could have happened that night. She's beautiful, she said honestly. You must be proud. Mark chuckled softly. More than proud. She keeps me going. Even when, he trailed off, but Evelyn caught the shadow that passed over his features. When what? She asked gently. He hesitated, then sighed. Even when the bills pile up. Even when I wonder if I'm failing her. I do this job because it's steady. Because it means I can put food on the table. But some nights, I lie awake wondering if it's enough. Evelyn felt a pang in her chest. She had spent years climbing the corporate ladder, measuring success in quarterly profits and boardroom victories. But here was a man measuring success in dinners shared, school supplies bought, and the safety of his child. 2 months later, the company hosted its annual gala. Employees in shimmering dresses and tailored suits filled the grand ballroom, laughter and music echoing through the night. Evelyn stood at the podium, her speech polished and rehearsed. She spoke of innovation, of growth, of the future. But as her eyes scanned the crowd, they landed on Mark, standing quietly near the back in his uniform, broom in hand. And suddenly, the words on the teleprompter felt hollow. She cleared her throat. Tonight, we celebrate achievements, yes, she said, her voice steadying. But I want to take a moment to recognize someone who embodies what real strength looks like. Not in profit margins, not in titles, but in courage, vigilance, and love. The room shifted, curious whispers stirring. Evelyn gestured toward the back. Mark, she said, her eyes locking onto his. You saved me, and you reminded me that sometimes, the greatest heroes are the ones we overlook. Thank you. The applause that erupted was thunderous, echoing through the ballroom like a tide rising higher than anyone expected. Mark froze, his face flushing as every eye turned toward him. For a man used to blending into the background, the sudden spotlight was overwhelming. But then his gaze flicked to Lily, standing shyly by the doorway in a borrowed dress Evelyn had arranged for her. She was beaming at her father, pride radiating from her like sunlight. And in that moment, Mark stood taller. The night wound down, the music softening, the crowd thinning. Evelyn found herself outside on the terrace, city lights twinkling below. Mark joined her, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. You didn't have to do that, he muttered, his voice rough. I did, Evelyn replied simply, because you matter, more than you think. For a long moment, they stood in silence, the weight of unspoken truths between them. Then Evelyn turned, her expression softer than he had ever seen. You changed how I see this company. How I see people, and maybe even how I see myself. Mark swallowed hard, his throat tight. He didn't know what to say. But maybe he didn't need to. Because sometimes, gratitude wasn't in words. It was in the way someone finally looked at you and truly saw you.